The dust kicked up in lazy spirals as Teresa Parker stood on the porch of the rundown boarding house, watching the stranger ride into White Oaks, New Mexico on a dusty September morning in 1883. And something in her chest tightened with the kind of warning a woman learns to trust when she has 5 children depending on her survival. The cowboy sat tall in his saddle, his hat pulled low against the late summer sun, and even from this distance, she could see the deliberate way he carried himself, like a man who had seen enough of life to know its cruelties, but hadn't let them break him yet. Teresa wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and turned back inside, where her oldest daughter Emma was trying to keep the younger ones from fighting over the last biscuit from breakfast. "Mama, Benjamin took my portion," 8-year-old Sarah complained, her freckled face scrunched up in indignation. "Did not," Benjamin shot back, his 10-year-old voice cracking with the injustice of false accusation. "She already ate hers." Teresa moved between them with practiced ease, breaking off a piece of her own barely touched breakfast and handing it to Sarah. "Hush now, both of you. We do not quarrel over food in this house. We share what we have and we are grateful for it." 15-year-old Emma caught her mother's eye with a look of weary understanding that no girl her age should possess. Emma had grown up too fast since they lost everything 2 years ago, when Teresa's husband Robert died of cholera on the trail west. They had been heading to California with dreams of a better life, but those dreams had died with him in a shallow grave somewhere in the Arizona desert. Teresa had turned the wagon around with 5 grieving children and headed back east, stopping in White Oaks when their money ran out and winter threatened to catch them exposed on the plains. "Mama, can I go to the general store?" 12-year-old Lucy asked, bouncing on her toes with the endless energy of a child who hadn't yet learned that life could be exhausting. "Mrs. Henderson said she might have some fabric scraps for me." "Take Benjamin with you," Teresa said, counting out a few precious coins from the tin she kept hidden in the flour sack. "And keep hold of his hand crossing the street. Last time he nearly got run down by the mail coach." "I am not a baby," Benjamin protested, but he took his sister's hand anyway when Lucy grabbed it. 4-year-old Daniel looked up from the wooden horse Emma had carved for him, his dark eyes so much like his father's that sometimes Teresa had to look away. "When is Papa coming home?" The question still came occasionally, even after 2 years. Emma moved quickly to scoop him up, distracting him with promises of a story, and Teresa felt the familiar ache in her chest that never quite went away. She had loved Robert Parker with the fierce devotion of a woman who had married at 17 and known no other man. His death had not just taken her husband but her identity, leaving her adrift in a world that had no patience for widows with 5 hungry mouths to feed. She had found work taking in laundry and mending, her fingers raw from lye soap and her back aching from hours bent over the washboard. The boarding house owner, a gruff but fair man named Mr. Sullivan, let them have 2 small rooms on the top floor in exchange for Teresa cooking meals for his handful of permanent residents. It was barely survival, each day a careful calculation of pennies and portions, but it was survival nonetheless, and Teresa had learned to take fierce pride in keeping her children fed and safe. The stranger she had seen riding into town appeared at the boarding house 3 hours later, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Teresa was stirring a pot of stew for the evening meal, stretching the small amount of meat with potatoes and onions, when she heard Mr. Sullivan's voice in the front hall. "Room and board is $2 a week, paid in advance. Meals included but no drinking, no gambling, and no women in the rooms." "That sounds reasonable," a deep voice replied, and Teresa found herself pausing mid-stir to listen. There was something in that voice, a quiet strength underlaid with genuine warmth, that made her curious despite herself. "My cook provides breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening," Mr. Sullivan continued. "Miss it, and you miss it. She does not run a restaurant." "I would not dream of inconveniencing the lady," the stranger said, and Teresa heard the coins clink as they exchanged hands. "I appreciate you having a room available on short notice." Footsteps creaked up the stairs, and Teresa forced herself to focus back on her cooking. It was none of her business who took rooms at the boarding house. She had learned in her 2 years of widowhood to keep her head down and her attention on her own affairs. The world was not kind to women alone, and she had no intention of giving anyone reason to question her respectability or threaten the fragile security she had built for her children. But when the residents gathered around the long table for supper that evening, she found her eyes drawn to the newcomer despite her best intentions. He had removed his hat, revealing dark hair just touched with gray at the temples, and when he looked up and caught her staring, his face broke into a smile that transformed his weathered features from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "Madam," he said, standing as she brought the stew pot to the table, "that smells absolutely wonderful. I have been eating my own trail cooking for 3 weeks, and I can tell you this is going to be a blessed relief." "It is just stew," Teresa said, ladling portions into bowls with hands that she was annoyed to notice were trembling slightly. "Nothing fancy. Best kind of food there is," he replied. "Honest and filling. I am James Fitzgerald, by the way, new to White Oaks as of this morning." "Teresa Parker," she said, because manners required it, and then she fled back to the kitchen before he could say anything else. Emma was feeding Daniel at the small table they kept in the corner, with Sarah sitting nearby practicing her letters on a scrap of slate. "Who is that man?" Emma asked quietly, her voice pitched low enough that it would not carry to the dining room. "New boarder," Teresa said shortly. "Mind your own concerns and finish feeding your brother." But she could feel Emma's eyes on her, watchful and knowing in the way that made Teresa uncomfortable. Her eldest daughter had appointed herself guardian of the family's welfare, and she watched their mother with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had already lost one parent and would not risk losing the other. Teresa understood it, even appreciated it, but sometimes she wished Emma could just be a girl instead of carrying burdens that should never fall on 15-year-old shoulders. The next morning, Teresa rose before dawn as always, stoking the kitchen fire and beginning breakfast preparations for the boarders. She was rolling out biscuit dough when she heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to find James Fitzgerald in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Did not mean to startle you," he said quickly. "I could not sleep and thought I might make myself useful. Is there water that needs hauling or wood that needs splitting?" Teresa blinked at him in surprise. "Mr. Sullivan usually handles those chores." "Well, I am up and he is not, so I might as well make myself useful," James said with that same warm smile. "My mother would roll in her grave if she knew I was letting a lady work without offering assistance." "I am being paid for this work," Teresa pointed out, not sure what to make of him. "You are a paying guest. You should not be hauling water." "Madam, I have been sleeping on hard ground and eating hardtack for longer than I care to admit," James said. "Getting to haul a few buckets of water in exchange for actual biscuits sounds like the best trade I have made in months." Something about his easy manner disarmed her, and before she quite knew how it happened, Teresa found herself pointing him toward the water pump in the backyard. He returned a few minutes later with 2 full buckets, setting them down by the stove without spilling a drop, and then disappeared again to split kindling for the firebox. By the time the other boarders began shuffling down for breakfast, James had not only hauled water and split wood, but had also swept the dining room and carried down the heavy pot of coffee that usually required Teresa to make 2 trips. She watched him settle at the table with the other men, accepting their gruff morning greetings with the easy camaraderie of someone comfortable anywhere, and tried to ignore the small, warm feeling in her chest that she had no business entertaining. Lucy and Benjamin came clattering down the back stairs just as Teresa was finishing serving the boarders, both of them hungry and noisy in the way of children who had not yet learned to move quietly through the world. James looked up at the commotion, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Well, hello there," he said to them. "I was wondering when I would meet the rest of the household. You must be Mrs. Parker's young ones." "I am Lucy and this is Benjamin," Lucy announced with her usual confidence. "We have 2 more sisters and a brother upstairs. How many children do you have?" "Lucy Manners," Teresa said sharply, mortified by her daughter's boldness, but James just laughed, the sound warm and unforced. "No offense taken, madam. It is a fair question." He turned back to Lucy. "I do not have any children yet, never been married." "Why not?" Benjamin asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. "Are you mean, Benjamin?" Teresa said, her voice carrying the tone that warned she was reaching the end of her patience. "I do not think I am mean," James said thoughtfully, as if seriously considering the question. "But I have spent most of my life drifting from place to place, working cattle drives and mining camps and whatever else would pay. That is no kind of life for a wife or children, would not be fair to them. Our papa died," Sarah piped up from where she had followed her siblings down the stairs. "He got sick on the trail and Mama buried him and we had to turn around." The dining room went quiet, the other boarders suddenly very focused on their plates. Teresa felt her face burn with embarrassment and grief, the old wound torn fresh by her daughter's innocent words. She opened her mouth to send the children back upstairs, but James spoke first. "I am very sorry to hear that," he said to Sarah, his voice gentle but not condescending. "Your papa must have been a brave man to take his family west. That is not an easy journey." "Mama was braver," Emma said from the stairs, where she had appeared with Daniel on her hip. "She was the one who brought us back alive." James looked at Teresa then, and something in his eyes made her throat tight. It was not pity, which she had seen too much of in the past 2 years. It was respect, recognition of something she had fought for with every breath in her body and received precious little acknowledgement for. "Yes," he said simply. "I imagine she was." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Teresa found both comforting and unsettling. James proved to be unlike any boarder they had hosted before. He was up before dawn every morning, helping with chores before heading out to whatever business had brought him to White Oaks. He worked for the local cattle outfit. Teresa learned from Mr. Sullivan, brought in to help with the fall roundup and drive. In the evenings, he would return tired and dusty, but always with a smile and a kind word for her children. He never overstepped, never presumed, but his presence became woven into the fabric of their lives in small ways. He fixed the loose board on the porch steps that Teresa had been meaning to get to for months. He brought home penny candy for the younger children and a pretty blue ribbon for Lucy that matched her eyes. He sat at the table after supper and helped Benjamin with his arithmetic, his patience apparently endless even when the boy struggled with concepts that should have been simple. "You are good with them," Teresa said one evening, watching from the kitchen as James helped Sarah sound out words in the tattered primer she used for learning to read. "They are easy to be good with," James replied, not looking up from the book. "They are fine children. You should be proud." "I am," Teresa said softly. "They are all I have." James did look up then, his dark eyes finding hers across the room. "They are lucky to have you." The simple words hit Teresa somewhere deep, in a place she had locked away when Robert died and survival became the only thing that mattered. She turned away quickly, busying herself with wiping down surfaces that were already clean, and tried to ignore the way her heart was beating faster than it had any right to. 3 weeks after James arrived in White Oaks, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing autumn rain that turned the streets to mud and kept everyone inside. The children grew restless and quarrelsome, cooped up in the small rooms with nothing to do. Teresa was at her wits' end, trying to keep them quiet so they would not disturb the boarders when James appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I know a few games," he offered. "If you would not mind me playing with them, might help burn off some energy." Teresa hesitated, then nodded. She was too tired to refuse help when it was offered, and the children needed something to occupy them before they drove each other mad. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched as James organized them into teams for charades, acting out various animals and occupations with such exaggerated movements that even little Daniel was giggling uncontrollably. Emma hung back at first, her natural suspicion of strangers keeping her reserved, but even she eventually got drawn in when James dramatically pantomimed a chicken laying an egg and fell over in the process. "You are good at this," Lucy declared, hugging his arm with easy affection. "You should stay forever." James' eyes flickered to Teresa for just a moment before he ruffled Lucy's hair. "Well, I am here for a while yet. The cattle drive does not leave until next month." "Where will you go then?" Benjamin asked, suddenly serious. "Wherever the work takes me," James said with forced lightness. "That is the way of it when you are a cowboy. You drift." "That sounds lonely," Emma said quietly, and Teresa saw understanding pass between her daughter and James, two people who knew what it was like to carry burdens silently. "It can be," James admitted, "but it is the life I chose." That night, after the children were asleep and the boarding house had gone quiet, Teresa found herself standing at the window of her small room, looking out at the rain-soaked street. She thought about James' words about choosing a lonely life and wondered what it cost him. He was not like most cowboys she had known, men who drifted because they could not settle, who ran from responsibility instead of toward it. James seemed different, like a man who was waiting for something but did not quite believe he deserved to find it. She pressed her hand against the cool glass and made herself admit what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was developing feelings for James Fitzgerald, the kind of feelings a respectable widow with 5 children had no business entertaining. He would leave with the cattle drive in a few weeks, off to whatever the next season brought, and she would still be here in White Oaks with her laundry and her mending and her children who depended on her for everything. It would be foolish to let herself care for him. It would be inviting heartbreak into a life that had already seen enough of it. She should maintain proper distance, should stop noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled or how gentle his hands were when he helped little Daniel with his coat buttons. But knowing what she should do and actually doing it, Teresa was discovering, were two very different things. October arrived with crisp mornings and the smell of wood smoke in the air. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, and the cattle outfit began preparations for the drive that would take their stock to market in Las Vegas. James worked longer days, often returning after the supper hour to find his plate warming in the oven and Teresa still in the kitchen, finishing the endless work that filled her days. "You should not wait up," he said one evening, finding her darning socks by lamplight. "You work harder than anyone I have ever known. You need your rest." "So do you," Teresa replied, examining a particularly worn heel and debating whether it could be saved or needed to be cut up for rags. "You will be up before dawn again tomorrow." James pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his movements heavy with exhaustion. He had removed his hat, and his hair was pressed flat from wearing it all day. There was a scrape across his cheek from some mishap on the range, and dirt was ground into the creases around his eyes. He looked tired and worn and somehow more appealing than any man had a right to be. "Teresa," he said, and the use of her first name made her look up sharply. He had always been scrupulously proper with her, always Mrs. Parker or Madam, and the change felt significant. "I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve." Her heart began to pound. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I do not think, James," he interrupted gently. "Please call me James, and please hear me out before you send me away." Teresa set down her darning, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "All right. I am leaving in 2 weeks with the drive," James said, his eyes steady on hers. "That was always the plan. Get to Las Vegas, collect my pay, and drift on to wherever the next job took me. But lately I have been thinking that maybe I am tired of drifting. Maybe I am ready to put down roots somewhere. Mr. Fitzgerald, James, you do not need to explain your plans to me." "But I do," he said earnestly, leaning forward, "because my plans have changed and you are the reason why. These past weeks, being here with you and your children, have shown me what I have been missing all these years. I have been lonely, Teresa. So lonely I stopped noticing it most of the time because it was just how things were. But now, I know what it feels like to come home to laughter and questions about my day and little hands grabbing mine. I know what it feels like to watch a woman work with grace and strength, and somehow keep everyone around her fed and safe and happy even when she is exhausted. And I do not want to give that up." Teresa's throat was tight. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you," James said simply. "I love the way you protect your children like a wolf guards her cubs. I love how you can stretch a pound of beans into dinner for 12 people. I love that you taught Sarah her letters even though you barely have time to sleep. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you count pennies twice to make sure you did not miss any. I love that you have been through hell and came out the other side still fighting." "I have 5 children," Teresa said, the words bursting out desperately. "5 children, James. I am a widow with nothing but debt and worn-out shoes and a dozen responsibilities I can barely manage." "You could have any woman in this territory. Why would you want to take on a family that is not even yours?" James smiled then, slow and warm and absolutely certain. "Then I will have 6 reasons to love." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. Teresa felt tears spring to her eyes despite her best efforts to hold them back. "You do not know what you are saying. Children are expensive and exhausting, and they will take up every bit of space in your life. Emma is suspicious of everyone. Benjamin gets into everything he should not. Lucy never stops talking. Sarah has nightmares, and Daniel still wets the bed sometimes. It would be chaos." "I like chaos," James said, and now he was grinning. "Better than the alternative, which is a quiet, empty life with no one to care for and no one to care for me." "You would regret it," Teresa whispered, even as hope was blooming in her chest like something wild and dangerous. "When the reality sets in and you realize what you have taken on, you would regret it." "No," James said firmly. He reached across the table and took her hands in his, calloused palms warm against her work-roughened skin. "I would never regret it. I am 38 years old, Teresa. I have spent 20 years roaming this territory doing whatever work came my way. I have been shot at and thrown from horses and half frozen and half starved and desperately lonely even when I was surrounded by other men. I know exactly what I want, and I want this. I want you. I want your children. I want to come home to a full house and fix broken porch steps and help with arithmetic homework. I want to love you the way you deserve to be loved, the way that actually helps instead of just adding another burden to your shoulders. Teresa was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them away. I loved my husband. I loved Robert so much. I know, James said gently, and I would never try to replace him. He gave you those beautiful children and he clearly loved you well. But he is gone, Teresa, and you are still here. You are allowed to live. You are allowed to be loved. It has only been 2 years. It could be 10 years and it would not matter, James said. There is no right amount of time for grief. But there is also no virtue in being alone forever because you are afraid of what people might say. That hit home because Teresa knew he was right. She had been so focused on survival and respectability that she had not let herself imagine anything else. The thought of opening her heart again was terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and being asked to jump. What if he left? What if he died? What if her children grew to love him and then lost another father? But what if he did not leave? What if this was real? The drive, she said shakily. You are leaving in 2 weeks. I could stay, James said immediately. I could tell them I am not going. There is other work around here, and no, Teresa interrupted. You already committed, you should go, but when you come back. She took a deep breath, hardly believing what she was about to say. When you come back, if you still feel the same way, then we can talk about this properly. Teresa, I need time, she said firmly, finding her strength again. I need to think about what this would mean for my children. I need to talk to them. And you need time away from here to be sure this is not just infatuation or loneliness or whatever it is that makes people think they feel something they do not. James studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, that is fair. The drive will take about 6 weeks all told. I will be back before Thanksgiving, and if you decide you do not want me, I will respect that. But Teresa, yes, I am not going to change my mind. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of suspended time. James continued helping around the boarding house, and the children continued monopolizing his attention whenever he was home, and Teresa continued trying to sort through her tangled feelings. She watched him with her children and saw genuine affection there, not the forced patience of someone trying to win her favor. She watched him with the other boarders and saw a man comfortable in his own skin, respected by his peers. She watched him when he did not know she was looking and saw the way his eyes followed her, careful and hopeful and impossibly tender. Emma cornered her one evening while they were preparing supper together. Are you going to marry him? Teresa nearly dropped the knife she was using to chop carrots. What? Mr. Fitzgerald, Emma said impatiently. Are you going to marry him when he gets back from the drive? Because it is obvious he wants to marry you. Emma, that is not we have not how did you even? Teresa gave up and set down the knife, turning to face her daughter. It is complicated. It does not seem complicated, Emma said with the blunt honesty of youth. He loves you. You love him. He is good to us. What is complicated about that? He has only known us for 6 weeks. Papa proposed to you after 2 weeks, Emma pointed out. You told me that story, Teresa sighed. That was different. How? Because I was 17 and stupid, and your father did not have to take on 5 children when he married me. Teresa said more sharply than she intended. Because the world is not kind to women who seem too eager or men who take on burdens that are not theirs. Because I am terrified of making a mistake that could hurt all of you. Emma was quiet for a moment, absently stirring the pot on the stove. She had grown tall in the past year, almost as tall as Teresa now, and sometimes her maturity was startling. I think you are terrified of being happy, she said finally. I think you got used to everything being hard, and now that something might be good, you do not trust it. The observation was so accurate that Teresa felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She pulled Emma into a fierce hug, pressing her face into her daughter's hair. "When did you get so wise?" "I pay attention," Emma said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "And Mama, I liked Papa, I loved him. But I was also 12 years old and old enough to see that he was not always easy. He had dreams that were bigger than his common sense, and we paid the price for that. Mr. Fitzgerald is different. He sees you. He sees us. And he is not trying to chase something that does not exist. He just wants what is right in front of him." "You are 15 years old," Teresa said, pulling back to look at her daughter. "You should not have to think about things like this." "Maybe not," Emma agreed, "but I do anyway. And I want you to know that if you want to marry him, we will be all right with it, all of us. We have talked about it." "You have talked about it?" Teresa asked faintly. "Lucy thinks he is wonderful. Benjamin wants him to teach him to ride better. Sarah likes that he reads to her, and Daniel already calls him James instead of Mr., so I think that tells you everything you need to know," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I was the suspicious one, and even I can see that he is genuine. So if you want him, Mama, have him. We will support you." Teresa hugged her daughter again, overwhelmed by gratitude and love for this fierce young woman who had grown up too fast, but somehow stayed kind despite it. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," Emma said firmly. "You deserve everything good." The morning James left with the cattle drive was gray and cold, with frost on the ground and the promise of winter in the air. Teresa made him a big breakfast and packed extra biscuits and jerky for the journey, her hands steady even though her heart was hammering. The children clustered around him at the door, extracting promises that he would be careful and come back soon. "I will be back before you know it," James assured them, crouching down to Daniel's level. "You be good for your mama, all right, and practice your letters. I want to see how much better you have gotten when I get home. Will you really come back?" Benjamin asked, his voice small and uncertain in a way that broke Teresa's heart. Her son had learned too young that men could leave and never return. "I promise," James said, looking Benjamin straight in the eye. "I will come back. You have my word on that." Then he stood and turned to Teresa, and for a moment they just looked at each other. There was so much she wanted to say, but none of it would come out with 5 children watching and Mr. Sullivan pretending not to eavesdrop from the parlor. "Be safe," she said finally, inadequately. "Always am," James replied with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Then, so quietly that only she could hear, he added, 6 weeks, Teresa. I will be counting every day." She watched him ride away with the other cowboys, dust rising from the hooves of their horses in the cold morning air, and pressed her hand against her chest where her heart was aching. Emma moved to stand beside her, slipping her hand into Teresa's. "He will come back," Emma said confidently. "Yes," Teresa agreed and realized with surprise that she believed it. James Fitzgerald was a man who kept his promises. The 6 weeks that followed were both endless and too short. Teresa threw herself into her work, taking on extra mending and laundry to save up a small cushion of money. She let herself imagine, in quiet moments when the children were asleep, what it might be like to have James as a permanent part of their lives, to have someone to share the burdens and the decisions, to have someone who looked at her not as a widow to be pitied, but as a woman to be loved. She thought about Robert, too, sitting by the window on long evenings, and remembering the boy who had courted her with wildflowers and grand promises. He had loved her in his way, she knew that. But Emma was right that his dreams had always been bigger than his practical sense. And it had been Teresa who had to figure out how to make reality work while he chased visions of gold and land and opportunity. His death had been tragic and she had grieved him truly, But if she was honest with herself, their marriage had not been the partnership she had once hoped for. With James, she thought it could be different. He was older, steadier, a man who had been tested by life and come through it with his kindness intact. He did not make grand promises about wealth and success. He just offered himself, his labor, his love. It was both more humble and more valuable than anything Robert had ever given her. 3 days before Thanksgiving, word came through town that the cattle drive had reached Las Vegas and would be heading back within the week. Teresa found herself watching the road compulsively, her heart jumping every time she saw a rider in the distance. The children caught her nervous energy becoming fractious and excited in equal measure. "What if he forgot about us?" Lucy asked on the 5th day, chewing her thumbnail anxiously. "He did not forget," Teresa said with more confidence than she felt. "He will be here soon." But as another day passed, and then another with no sign of James, Teresa began to wonder if she had been a fool. Maybe the distance and time had made him realize what a burden he would be taking on. Maybe he had met someone else in Las Vegas, some young woman without children and complications. Maybe he had just kept riding, off to whatever the next season brought, and his pretty words had been just that, words, sincere in the moment but not built to last. She was washing dishes on the 7th day when she heard the commotion outside. Horses in the street, men calling greetings, the sound of laughter and reunion. Teresa dried her hands and stepped onto the porch, her heart in her throat. James Fitzgerald sat astride his horse in the evening light, tired and dusty and breaking into a smile when he saw her. He dismounted in one fluid motion and stood there in the street, holding his hat in his hands, looking at her with such open longing that Teresa could not breathe. "I came back," he said simply. The children exploded out of the house behind her, shouting his name and running down the steps to swarm around him. James laughed and tried to greet them all at once, ruffling hair and accepting hugs and answering their excited questions about the drive. But his eyes kept finding Teresa over their heads, asking a question she suddenly knew the answer to. "Children, go inside," Teresa said, her voice shaking. "I need to speak with Mr. Fitzgerald alone." "But Mama," Benjamin started. "Inside," Teresa repeated firmly. "Now." Emma herded her siblings back into the house, looking over her shoulder with an encouraging smile. The street had grown quiet, the other cowboys having dispersed to their own reunions and celebrations. It was just Teresa and James in the fading light, and she knew that what she said next would change everything. She walked down the steps slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. James watched her come, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Did you mean it?" Teresa asked when she reached him. "Everything you said before you left. Did you mean it?" "Every word," James said hoarsely. "Teresa, I have thought about nothing but you and those children for 6 weeks. I nearly went crazy out there, counting down the days until I could come back. I meant every word, and I will mean them for the rest of my life if you will let me." "I have 5 children," Teresa said, and her voice was steady now, sure. "5 children who have already lost one father. If you do this, if you become part of our family, you cannot leave. Not when things get hard, not when money is tight, not when you are exhausted and wondering what you got yourself into. You have to stay. They need that. I need that." "I will stay," James said. "Through every hard thing and every good thing and every ordinary thing in between. I will stay, Teresa. That is what love means." "Then yes," Teresa said, and started crying even as she smiled. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I love you. Yes to all of it." James closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms and holding her so tightly that she could feel his heart pounding against her cheek. He smelled like dust and sweat and horses, and she had never experienced anything more perfect in her life. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for trusting me. I will spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." The door burst open and the children spilled out again, clearly having been watching from the windows. Lucy was shrieking with joy, Benjamin was whooping, Sarah was bouncing on her toes, and even Emma was grinning widely. Daniel toddled down the steps as fast as his little legs would carry him and attached himself to James' leg with fierce determination. "Does this mean you are going to be our papa now?" Daniel asked, looking up with those huge dark eyes. James knelt down so he was at Daniel's level, bringing Teresa with him, her hand clasped firmly in his. "If that is all right with you, I would be honored to be your papa." "Will you live with us?" "Yes. Forever, forever," James promised solemnly. "Good," Daniel declared and threw his arms around James' neck. The other children joined the embrace, until they were all tangled together in the middle of the street, laughing and crying and holding on to each other like they could keep this moment safe through sheer force of will. Teresa found herself in the center of it all, surrounded by her children and this man who had chosen them, and felt something tight in her chest finally release. She had been so afraid for so long. Afraid of not being enough, afraid of losing what little she had, afraid of hoping for anything more than mere survival. But here, now in this chaotic, joyful embrace, she let herself believe that maybe life could be more than just enduring. Maybe it could be good. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in White Oaks. Teresa wore her best dress, cleaned and pressed, and with new buttons Emma had helped her sew on. The children stood with them, scrubbed and brushed and barely able to contain their excitement. James wore new clothes purchased with his wages from the drive, and when he spoke his vows his voice rang clear and certain through the tiny sanctuary. "I promise to love and honor you all the days of my life," he said, looking into Teresa's eyes. "I promise to protect and provide for you and your children. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, good or difficult. You are my home now, Teresa. You and those 5 beautiful children, and I will spend every day proving myself worthy of that gift." Teresa's vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. "I promise to love you and trust you. I promise to build a life with you, not just for me but for all of us. I promise to see you, James, the way you have seen me. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for staying." When the Reverend pronounced them married, James kissed her gently while the children cheered and Mr. Sullivan wiped suspiciously at his eyes from the back pew. They walked back to the boarding house as a family, Teresa's hand tucked into the crook of James' arm, the children dancing ahead of them in the street. That evening, they celebrated with a special supper that had used up most of Teresa's carefully saved money. James contributed his remaining wages without hesitation, insisting that it was family money now and to be used for family needs. They ate until they were stuffed, and then James produced peppermint sticks he had been hiding in his saddlebag and distributed them to the shrieking delight of the children. Later, after the children had been put to bed with much giggling and excitement about sharing their home with James permanently, Teresa and her new husband stood together in the small room that was now theirs. She felt suddenly shy, aware that this was a beginning of something entirely new. "I need to tell you something," James said, taking her hands. "I have some money saved. Not a fortune, but enough to put a down payment on some land. I have been thinking about starting a small ranch, running some cattle of our own instead of working for someone else. It would be hard work and it would take time to build up, but it would be ours. What do you think?" Teresa stared at him. "You want to stay in White Oaks, build a life here." "I want to build a life wherever you are," James said. "But yes, I was thinking here." The children are settled, they have friends and school. It seems right to put down roots where you have already begun to grow them. A ranch, Teresa said slowly, testing the idea. We would need a house, a bigger place than these 2 rooms. I can build a house, James said confidently. I have done carpentry work before. We will start small, just a few rooms, but we can add on as we need to, and the children can help. It will be good for them, learning how to build something with their own hands. Teresa thought about it, turning the idea over in her mind. After years of barely surviving, the notion of actually building something, of having land and a home that was truly theirs, seemed almost impossibly grand. But looking at James' eager face, she realized he was serious. He was already planning their future, already thinking about what they could create together. "All right," she said, and felt that same swooping sensation she had experienced when she had agreed to marry him. Like jumping off a cliff, except this time she trusted that someone would catch her. "Let us build a ranch." James' face lit up with joy, and he swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the small space until she was laughing and shushing him, worried about waking the children. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time since their chaste ceremony kiss, and Teresa felt warmth spread through her entire body. "I love you," James murmured against her lips. "I will love you until the day I die, Teresa Fitzgerald." "I love you too," Teresa whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They found 20 acres of land just outside White Oaks, with a creek running through it and good grazing for cattle. James used his savings for the down payment, and they moved onto the property in early December, living in a tent while James began construction on the house. It was the hardest winter of Teresa's life in many ways, trying to cook and keep the children warm and clean while living in canvas walls with snow falling outside. But it was also strangely wonderful, all of them working together toward a common goal. James taught Benjamin and Emma how to measure and cut boards. Lucy helped Teresa make a garden plan for spring. Sarah collected kindling and kept the fire going. Even little Daniel had jobs, carrying tools and nails and feeling important. They worked from dawn until dark and fell into their bedrolls exhausted every night, but there was a sense of purpose to it all that made the hardship bearable. By February, they had 4 walls and a roof. By March, they had a real floor and a functioning fireplace. By April, they had beds and a table and the beginnings of something that felt like a real home. James bought 6 head of cattle with money earned from winter work on other ranches, and they had the beginnings of their own herd. Teresa planted her garden in the spring sunshine, her hands in the earth, while James and Benjamin built a chicken coop. Emma helped hang curtains in the windows, simple muslin but clean and bright. Lucy painted wildflowers on the walls of the room she shared with Sarah, and Daniel toddled around getting underfoot and being generally adored by everyone. In May, Teresa realized she was pregnant. She stood in the morning light feeling nauseous and terrified and somehow joyful all at once, pressing her hand to her still flat stomach and trying to process what this meant. Another child when they already had 5. Another mouth to feed, another life depending on them. She told James that evening when they were alone, watching him carefully for signs of regret or worry. Instead, his face transformed with wonder. "Really?" he breathed. "A baby, are you upset?" Teresa asked anxiously. "I know it is more responsibility and we are just getting established." "Upset," James interrupted. He pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "Teresa, I am thrilled. Terrified but thrilled. Our child, someone who is part of both of us. That is a miracle." "We might have to add on to the house sooner than we planned," Teresa said, practical even in the midst of emotion. "Then we will add on," James said simply. "We will figure it out. We always do," they told the children at supper that night. There was a moment of silence as they processed the information, and then Lucy squealed with delight. "A baby? Can it be a girl? I want a sister closer to my age." "I want a brother," Benjamin countered immediately. "We are outnumbered by girls as it is." "You do not get to choose," Emma pointed out with the authority of the eldest. "The baby will be what the baby will be, but I think it is wonderful, Mama. Another person to love." Sarah pressed her hand to Teresa's stomach with reverent curiosity. "When will it come?" "Not until winter," Teresa said. "You will all have to help even more than you already do, and be patient with me when I am tired or sick." "We can do that," Benjamin said confidently. "We are good at helping." Daniel, not quite understanding but not wanting to be left out, announced that he would share his wooden horse with the baby, which made everyone laugh and hug him. That night, lying in bed next to her husband with the sounds of their children sleeping nearby, Teresa felt a contentment she had never known was possible. Her body ached from the day's work, her hands were rough and calloused, and she owned exactly one good dress. But she had a home, land, children who were healthy and happy, and a man who loved her with a steadiness she could depend on. "Thank you," she whispered to James in the darkness. "For what?" he murmured sleepily, pulling her closer. "For seeing me, for choosing us, for staying." "Best decision I ever made," James said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "6 reasons to love, remember. About to be 7. The baby came on a cold January night in 1885, attended by the doctor from town and Emma, who had insisted on being present. It was a girl, small but healthy, with a surprising amount of dark hair and her father's eyes. They named her Grace, because that was what she felt like, unearned, perfect grace. James held his daughter with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face without shame. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "Teresa, she is so beautiful." The other children crowded around to meet their new sister, gentle and curious and full of advice. Lucy declared herself the official assistant mother. Benjamin promised to teach her to ride when she was bigger. Sarah sang her a lullaby she made up on the spot. Emma helped change her first diaper with competent efficiency. Daniel patted her tiny hand and looked baffled by how small she was. "She is so little," he said dubiously. "When will she get big enough to play?" "Give her time," Teresa said with a smile, exhausted but happy. "She will catch up before you know it." The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic of family life. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, each year adding a few more head of cattle, a few more improvements to the house and land. James proved to be exactly what he had promised: steady, hardworking, devoted. He was not a perfect man. He could be stubborn when he thought he was right, and he sometimes worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide. But he was present and engaged in every aspect of their lives, and he loved Teresa and all the children with a fierce loyalty that never wavered. Emma grew into a capable young woman, and at 18 married a rancher's son from a neighboring spread. Teresa cried at the wedding, proud and sad in equal measure to see her fierce eldest daughter starting her own life. James walked Emma down the aisle and danced with her at the celebration afterward, and when Emma hugged him goodbye she whispered, "Thank you for being a real father to me. I am so glad Mama found you." Benjamin discovered a talent for working with horses, and at 17 began hiring out to neighboring ranches to break and train their stock. He was serious and focused, so much like James that sometimes Teresa had to look twice to remember he was Robert's son by blood. But James had shaped him into the man he was becoming, and that mattered more than genetics. Lucy never did stop talking, but she channeled that energy into teaching at the small school in White Oaks. Sarah became the artist of the family, selling her paintings to tourists, and using the money to help support the household. Daniel grew tall and strong and took to ranching like he had been born to it, working alongside James every day and learning everything his stepfather could teach him. Grace grew up adored by her older siblings and parents alike, sunny-natured and curious about everything. She was the bridge between the two families, related by blood to James and Teresa both, and she seemed to cement them all together in ways both subtle and profound. In the summer of 1890, on their 5th wedding anniversary, James surprised Teresa by taking her into town for dinner at the new hotel restaurant. It was the fanciest meal she had eaten since before Robert died, and she felt almost guilty about the expense. But James insisted, and so she wore her good dress and let him escort her like they were courting all over again. "I have something for you," James said after they had finished eating. He pulled out a small, wrapped package and set it on the table between them. Teresa unwrapped it carefully, smoothing the paper to save for later use, and found a small leather-bound book. She opened it to find the pages filled with James' careful handwriting. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "Our story," James said. "I have been writing it down over the past few months. How we met, how we fell in love, how we built this life together. I wanted Grace to have it someday, so she will know how she came to be. But I also wanted you to have it so you could see yourself the way I see you. Strong and brave and beautiful, and so much more than you give yourself credit for." Teresa read the first page through tears that made the words blur. James had described her standing on the boarding house porch that first morning, written about how the sight of her had made him think for the first time in years that maybe he could have a home. He had detailed the small moments she had forgotten or never known. Were significant the way she had smiled at him over the stove, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes when she watched her children, the careful way she had let herself begin to trust him. "This is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me," Teresa said, closing the book and holding it to her chest. "Thank you, James, for this and for everything. You gave me a life worth living," James said simply. "This is nothing compared to that." They walked home under a sky full of stars, hand in hand like young lovers. The house was quiet when they arrived, the children all asleep, or at least pretending to be. James built up the fire while Teresa changed into her nightgown, and then they sat together in the rocking chair he had built for her when she was pregnant with Grace. "You ever regret it?" Teresa asked quietly. "Taking on all of us. You could have had a different life." "Not for 1 second," James said firmly. "This is the life I wanted even before I knew it existed. You and those children are the best thing that ever happened to me." "7 reasons to love," Teresa murmured, thinking of their 6 children all safe and growing into good people, and the life they had built together out of nothing but hard work and devotion. "7 reasons," James agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And I love them more every single day." The ranch continued to grow over the following years. By 1895, they had 50 head of cattle and had added on to the house twice. Benjamin got married and built his own small house on the property, starting his own family while staying close to his roots. Lucy married a teacher from Santa Fe and moved away, promising to visit often and keeping that promise faithfully. Sarah's paintings began attracting serious attention from galleries in larger cities, though she always came home to White Oaks between shows. Daniel proved to have a head for business and took over much of the ranch management, freeing James to focus on training horses alongside Benjamin. Grace started school and showed signs of inheriting her mother's practical nature and her father's easy way with people. In the winter of 1896, Emma gave Teresa her first grandchild, a boy they named Robert after his grandfather. Teresa held the baby and thought about the young man she had loved and lost, and felt grateful that his name would continue even as her life had moved forward. James stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and she knew he understood the complicated emotions she was feeling. "He would have been proud of you," James said quietly, "of how you survived and protected his children, of the woman you are." "I could not have done any of it without you," Teresa replied. "You saved us, James. You saved me." "We saved each other," James corrected gently. "That is how love works." They celebrated Christmas that year with 3 generations gathered in their home. The house was bursting with people and noise and laughter. Teresa cooked for days, making enough food to feed everyone with plenty left over. The children had all contributed, bringing dishes and decorations and gifts. James had carved toys for the grandchildren and a beautiful jewelry box for Teresa. She had knitted him a new scarf and socks, practical gifts made precious by the hours of love she had put into them. After the meal, as they were all sitting around the fire, Daniel raised his glass in a toast. "To Mama and James," he said, "for building something out of nothing, for showing us what real love looks like, for making us a family." Everyone echoed the toast, glasses clinking together. Teresa looked around at all the faces she loved, her children grown and growing, her grandchild sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms, her husband beside her with silver in his hair now but the same steady warmth in his eyes. "Speech," Lucy called out. "Mama, you have to make a speech." Teresa stood reluctantly, never comfortable being the center of attention, but she looked at her family and found words coming anyway. 14 years ago, I was a widow with 5 children and nothing but fear and determination keeping us alive," she said. "I thought survival was the best I could hope for. I thought love was something I had already had and lost, and that the rest of my life would be about enduring. Then a cowboy rode into White Oaks and saw something in us worth loving. He chose us when he could have chosen an easier path. He stayed when things got hard. He built this life with me, board by board and day by day. Everything good we have comes from that choice he made, to look at my 5 children and say he would have 6 reasons to love." Her voice broke and she paused, wiping her eyes. James stood and came to stand beside her, taking her hand. "Now we have 7 reasons," Teresa continued. 7 children and growing, a grandchild, a ranch that provides for us, a home built with our own hands, and love, so much love I sometimes cannot believe it is real. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being ours, and thank you, James, for choosing us every single day." The room erupted in applause and then hugs, everyone wanting to embrace them both. Grace attached herself to Teresa's waist while Daniel shook James' hand with manly solemnity, even as his eyes were suspiciously bright. Emma hugged them both fiercely, whispering thanks into their ears. Benjamin and Sarah and Lucy joined in, and soon they were all tangled together in a mass of affection and joy. That night, after everyone had finally gone to bed or home, Teresa and James stood on their porch looking out at the land they had built together. The ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight, barns and corrals and pastures that represented years of back-breaking work and careful planning. It was not grand by some standards, but it was theirs, every inch of it earned honestly. "Are you happy?" James asked, pulling her close against the winter cold. "So happy I am afraid to say it out loud," Teresa admitted. "Like if I acknowledge it, something might come along and take it away." "Nothing is taking this away," James said firmly. "We built something strong, Teresa. Strong enough to weather whatever comes. I promise you that." She leaned into him, trusting his strength and steadiness as she had learned to do over the years. He had been right that day in the boarding house kitchen when he had said he would never regret choosing them. He had proved it over and over in 1,000 small ways and a few large ones, until Teresa finally believed it bone deep. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for finding us." "Thank you for letting me stay," James replied. They stood there together in the cold, clear night, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. Behind them, their house was full of warmth and love and family. Before them stretched years still to come, with all the joys and challenges that would bring. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that September morning in 1883, when a cowboy rode into White Oaks and changed all their lives forever. The years continued to unfold with both expected and unexpected gifts. Sarah married an art dealer from Denver in 1898 and divided her time between the two cities, though she always maintained that White Oaks was home. Daniel married Emma's husband's sister in 1899, cementing the connection between the two ranching families and allowing them to expand their operations cooperatively. Grace showed academic promise and spoke of perhaps attending the new teachers' college in Las Cruces when she was old enough. More grandchildren came, and Teresa found herself teaching her daughters and daughters-in-law the lessons she had learned about stretching resources and managing households. James taught his sons and sons-in-law about ranching and horsemanship and treating their wives with respect. The ranch became a gathering place for the growing extended family. The house expanded yet again to accommodate everyone when they all descended for holidays and special occasions. In 1900, Teresa and James celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a party that half the town attended. They had become pillars of the White Oaks community, respected for their hard work and generosity. James served on the town council, and Teresa organized charitable efforts for families in need, remembering her own desperate days, and determined that no one should suffer alone if help could be offered. 15 years, Teresa marveled as they danced together at the party. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you have always been with us." "Both," James agreed. "That is how it should be." The excitement of falling in love never quite fading, but the comfort of having always belonged together growing stronger. "You are getting poetic in your old age," Teresa teased gently. "You bring it out in me," James replied with a grin. In 1902, tragedy struck when Emma's husband was killed in a ranching accident, leaving her a widow with 3 young children. Teresa held her daughter through the grief, understanding as few others could what Emma was experiencing. James handled the practical matters, making sure Emma and the children were provided for and would never want. They insisted Emma move back to the main ranch house for a while, gathering her close until she could find her footing again. "I understand now," Emma said one evening, sitting with Teresa on the porch while their children played nearby. "What you went through when Papa died, I always thought I understood, but I did not really." "I wish you never had to know," Teresa said sadly. "But I also understand something else," Emma continued. "How hard it must have been to let yourself love James, to risk losing someone again. That took real courage, Mama, or foolishness," Teresa said wryly. "No," Emma said firmly. "Courage. And I hope someday I have that same courage, not now. Not for a long time, but someday, maybe I will be ready to try again. When and if you are ready, I will support you," Teresa promised. "Love is always worth the risk. James taught me that." True to her word, Emma did eventually find love again, marrying a widower from a neighboring ranch in 1904. He was a good man who treated her children as his own and gave her 2 more. Teresa stood at that wedding with tears of joy, grateful that her daughter had found happiness again. The 20th century brought changes to White Oaks and the wider world. There was talk of automobiles and telephones, though such modern conveniences seemed far away from ranch life. But the fundamentals remained the same: hard work, family, love. Teresa and James continued to build their life together, facing each challenge as a team. In 1907, as their 22nd wedding anniversary approached, James surprised Teresa by taking her on a trip to Santa Fe. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together for more than a day or two, and Teresa protested that they could not afford it and someone needed to be there to manage things. "Daniel and Benjamin can handle the ranch just fine," James said firmly, "and we can afford it. Teresa, we have been working non-stop for 22 years. We deserve a few days to ourselves." Santa Fe was like another world, full of art galleries and restaurants and hotels with electric lights. They stayed in a real hotel room with hot running water and ate meals they did not have to cook themselves. They visited the museums and shops, and James bought Teresa a beautiful silver necklace that cost more than he should have spent, but she loved too much to refuse. "This is wonderful," Teresa admitted as they sat in a cafe drinking actual coffee made by someone else. "I did not realize how much I needed a break until we took one." "You have earned it 1,000 times over," James said. "You have worked so hard for so long, taking care of all of us." "I wanted you to have something just for you. I have everything I need," Teresa said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You, our children, the life we built. I do not need fancy trips." "But you deserve them," James insisted. "You deserve everything good, Teresa." "I wish I could give you the world." "You already did," Teresa said softly. "You gave me a family and a home and love that has never failed. That is the world, James. That is everything." They returned to White Oaks refreshed and energized, ready to tackle another season of work. The grandchildren were growing, the oldest ones now helping with ranch work and learning the skills they would need to someday run their own places. Teresa taught her granddaughters to cook and sew and manage households. James taught his grandsons about cattle and horses and being good men. Together they passed down not just practical skills but values: honesty, hard work, loyalty, love. In 1910, Grace graduated from Teachers College and took a position at the White Oaks School. She was courted by several young men, but she seemed in no hurry to marry, content with her work and her independence. Teresa worried sometimes that Grace had not seen enough of the world beyond the ranch, but James reminded her that Grace would make her own choices in her own time, just as they all had. "She is happy," James pointed out. "That is what matters." "I just want her to have everything she dreams of," Teresa said. "She will," James assured her. "Look at her, Teresa. She is confident and capable and loved. We gave her a good foundation. Now we trust her to build on it." He was right, as he usually was about such things. Grace did eventually marry, choosing a banker from town in 1912. It was a practical match but also a loving one, and Teresa felt confident that her youngest daughter would be happy. The years settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was successful enough to provide well for multiple families. The children and grandchildren were thriving. Teresa and James had gray in their hair now and more aches in their joints, but they were still healthy and active. They still worked every day, though they had passed most of the heavy labor to younger hands. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. They still loved each other with the depth that came from decades of choosing each other day after day. In the spring of 1915, as they approached their 30th wedding anniversary, Daniel organized a surprise party that brought family from all over New Mexico. Teresa walked into what she thought was just a regular Sunday dinner to find the house full of children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. A banner hung across the main room reading, "30 Years of Love." "You did this?" Teresa asked Daniel, overwhelmed. "All of us did," Daniel corrected. "We wanted to celebrate you and James, everything you have built, everything you have given us. We love you both so much." The party was loud and chaotic and perfect. There was enough food to feed an army, brought by daughters and daughters-in-law who had learned from Teresa's example. There was music, with Benjamin playing his guitar and the grandchildren dancing. There were speeches and toasts, everyone wanting to share what Teresa and James meant to them. When it came time for Teresa and James to speak, they stood together in front of their enormous family, hands clasped tight. "30 years ago, I took a chance on a woman with 5 children and nothing but determination," James began. "It was the easiest decision I ever made and the best thing I ever did. Teresa, you have made every day of these 30 years worthwhile. You have given me a family, a purpose, a home. You have loved me even when I did not deserve it and believed in me when I doubted myself. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Teresa was crying openly now, not even trying to hide her tears. "James told me once that he would have 6 reasons to love. He was wrong. He has 100 reasons now, maybe 1,000. All these people here, this incredible family we built together. But you were always the most important reason, James. You saw me when I felt invisible. You stayed when everyone else would have left. You loved not just me but my children as if they were yours from the beginning. Everything good in my life came from you choosing us that day in the boarding house. I love you, James Fitzgerald. I will love you for whatever time we have left and into whatever comes after." The room erupted in applause and then tears and hugs. The party continued late into the night, filled with laughter and love, and the kind of joy that only comes from family gathered together. Teresa looked around at all the faces, children now grown with children of their own, grandchildren becoming adults, great-grandchildren representing the future, and felt a profound satisfaction. This was what they had built. Not just a ranch or a house or a business, but a legacy of love. Every person in this room existed in part because of the choice James had made 30 years ago to see 5 children as reasons to love instead of burdens to avoid. They had created something that would outlast them, that would ripple forward through generations. Late that night, alone in their room with the sounds of the party finally dying down, Teresa and James lay together in the bed they had shared for 3 decades. They were both tired from the long day, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from being surrounded by love. "Thank you," Teresa whispered into the darkness. "For what?" James asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "For everything," Teresa said simply. "For loving me, for loving them, for building this life with me, for staying." "Always," James replied, as he always did. "I will always stay. That is what love means." They fell asleep tangled together as they had for 30 years, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. Outside their window, the ranch lay quiet under the stars, land that bore the marks of their labor and love. In rooms throughout the house, their family slept peacefully, safe and provided for. And in the morning, they would wake and do it all again, work and love and build and grow, because that was what they had chosen, together, every single day for 30 years. The story of Teresa Parker and James Fitzgerald was not one of grand adventure or dramatic rescue. It was quieter than that, more ordinary and yet more profound. It was the story of 2 people choosing each other and choosing love, day after day, year after year. It was the story of a cowboy who looked at 5 children and saw 6 reasons to love, and a widow who found the courage to risk her heart again. It was the story of a family built not just on blood but on commitment and care, and the simple, powerful decision to stay. And as they slept, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created together, the ranch settled into silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as tomorrow always did. But tonight, there was only peace and the knowledge that they had done well. These two who had found each other in the dust and built something lasting from nothing but love and determination. Their story would be told by their children and their children's children, passed down as an example of what was possible when two people truly chose each other and never looked back. The legacy they built together would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the simple truth that love, real love, is always worth the risk. And somewhere in the darkness, as Teresa and James slept peacefully in each other's arms, that truth settled over the ranch like a blessing that sometimes the best things in life come not from avoiding complications, but from embracing them, from looking at challenges and seeing opportunities, from having the courage to say yes to love even when it seems impossible. That was their gift to their family, and to each other the knowledge that love, when chosen deliberately and honored faithfully, could transform everything.